Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with our luncheon keynote. And just so you know, they will be serving the rest of lunch while we're doing this. And so that will be happening. There are a few things in life that I really like to do. And one of them is to be able to introduce my former boss. So it is really my extreme pleasure to introduce Delaine Eastin. Most of you know that her resume. She was a city councilwoman in Union City. She was a member of the Assembly, at which point she was the chair of the Education Committee. She was the first and only woman superintendent of public instruction. Yay for that, yes, absolutely yay for that. She was a professor and advisor to the president of Mills College. And most recently, she was a candidate for governor, at which point the conversation when Delaine entered the race changed. Education from birth through higher ed became a focus of the conversation during the campaign. And we give her credit, as credit is what is due, for making that happen. But for me, Delaine is someone who I have had the privilege of working for, and she has taught me the life lessons of working hard, building partnerships, doing work you believe in, and always, always come back to what is best for children and their families. She is a champion. She is a leader. Most of all, she is an inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, Delaine Eastin.
Well, some of you know that Camille came to my office as an intern from Sac State. And she was brilliant, she's been a preschool teacher, knew a lot about preschool. And so I hired her as soon as her internship was over. We've been friends ever since, and it's been a wonderful friendship. This is the most important room I think we could be in California today. I want to give a shout out to the Advancement Project, to Molly and her team, for celebrating the importance of a marriage between child development preschool and K-12. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to come together. You know, I will say of late I'm pleased that some people are talking about the social values of education, but it's really interesting. At First Five and California Forward did a conference recently, and they had the business community present, and they are starting, and I know there are some here today, they are coming on board on the importance of education from birth to kindergarten. Ladies and gentlemen, we are past due to have this conversation. The fact is that it's not just about social and emotional development. It's not just about learning for learning's sake. It is also about the economic development of our country. Educated people actually make more contributions, intellectually and financially, because, you know, let's face it, if you get a better job, you pay more taxes. I will say that prenatal care is absolutely an important part of this conversation, and I'm really proud of the panels that I've been able to see today. I really do believe that as we look at the future of the state, this is a very propitious meeting we're having today. Birth to 12th grade water cooler meeting to join early childhood educators and K-12 stakeholders together at the hip is a job that must be done, and we must hit the ground running when the new governor is sworn in. Your networking here today is important, and in fact, we do need to have a much brighter light shined on child development. California must insist that the next governor, the next legislature, the next SBI be held accountable for election promises. Please remember that some are not aware of how our youngest children are growing up without the early support they need, the nurturing and education to reach their full potential. We must make sure that our state elected officials don't just tell us what we want to hear at conferences like this, but really stand up and step up to get the job done. And by the way, I'm kind of a wonky person. I actually am involved with Educate Our State, and they actually published a postcard that has this, but when I was head of Close the Gap, I went and gave each of the new women that was running a copy of the state constitution. I want you all to get out your state constitution, take a good look at Article 16, Section 8, because too many elected officials don't know what it says. This is what it says, quote, "From all state revenues, there shall first be set apart the monies to be applied by the state for the support of the public school system and the public institutions of higher education." It really says that in the state constitution. And so now, with the research we have, and by the way, many of you know I had a universal preschool task force. We convened it in 1997. It came out with its report in 1998. It called for universal preschool within 10 years. That was 20 years ago. Now I say we need to do it within 5 years. We need to get everybody together to focus on this important time of learning. Do you realize how many first world countries don't have universal preschool? That would be one, the United States of America. So I did a preschool task force, and afterward the French American Foundation invited me to France to see their preschools. I went there, the head of the preschool, the head bureaucrat at the preschools was a wonderful woman, great sense of humor. She says to me, "You know, my son, he is a doctor. He lives in Menlo Park, California. He and his wife have little children, and they have a lot of money so they can afford to give their little children the preschool. But the poor children need it more than my grandchildren, and they have to pay. What is wrong with you?" And I said, well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to come to France. I wanted to see the preschools of France. The French American Foundation has facilitated this. And oh, by the way, one of the people there was the editor of the Miami Herald, who's the guy who led the fight to bring universal preschool to Florida over the objections of then Governor Jeb Bush. But the reality is what we saw was amazing. The kids had an 8-hour day, 2 hours for lunch. Like you, they had real silverware and real plates and real glassware, not a bunch of paper. Oh, and they ate well. We ate what they ate. Arugula salad and roast lamb one day. Shepherd's pie with another glorious salad another day. I said to the woman, "So what can you tell me about your research here in France so that I can help sell this back in California?" And she says, "We French, we do not have the great research institutions that you Americans have. We use your research." And so, you know, as you heard today from people from Stanford and from Cal, we do have some of the finest research in the world. We know the steepest curve of learning is 0 to 5. Now let's do something about it. And, yeah. Many of you know I love the book, The Scientist in the Crib. I love the way the authors talk about how babies simultaneously revise, reshape, and restructure their knowledge. The authors put it this way, quote, "The human baby's computational system is really a network held together by language and love instead of optic fiber," end quote. We know and have known for years that we needed to do something. I say that after I'd had my task force and we couldn't move the needle, when Rob Reiner came to me and asked me to be the honorary co-chair of Prop 10 to create First Five of California, I said yes. And so we did pass it. But you may not remember how much, some of you probably weren't paying as close attention, because this has been a few years. You don't remember how much tobacco put in to defeat it. But the voters stood with us. They put it back on the ballot a second time, and the voters, by 7 out of 10 margin almost, said no. We're keeping First Five the way it is. And later when, by the way, I was proud to have sued Governor Wilson for illegally withholding money from schools. And at one point, the court ruled that from now on, if the governor wanted to redirect money that the voters had voted on, they had to get their permission. So when they tried to steal the money from First Five, the voters turned them down just 2-1. That's all. The voters get the importance of what we're doing here today. So I ran for governor because none of the candidates were talking about preschool or education. And later, Antonio gave me a shout out in Los Angeles. He said before Delaine got in the race, there was no conversation about preschool. She kept talking about it, and so I actually, even though I have grown children, I had never really studied it very much. And now I'm sold. So we've got to make sure, though, when the new governor is sworn in, that we hold his feet to the fire. We need to have universal preschool. It needs to happen fast. It needs to be high quality, and it needs to include child development before preschool, and it needs to be for every kid, especially for the poorest kids in our rural, remote counties. And oh, by the way, we actually do need paid maternity leave, fully paid maternity leave, paid paternity leave. It needs to be longer. Do you realize how many countries don't have fully paid maternity leave? That would be 4. You know who you're hanging with? Lesotho, Swaziland, and Papua New Guinea. How do you like traveling in that crowd? So it's time for us to step up with high-quality child care and health care to be available from prenatal all the way through birth, and then high-quality education available from age 3 right through the passage of a much stronger curriculum. And ladies and gentlemen, kindergarten needs to be mandatory and full day in the state of California. Now, I will say to all of you, a poll came out that shows overwhelming support for early childhood education. When 7 in 10 Californians want to do something, we should do it. And as wonderful as the work of First Five has been, we cannot put something this important reliant on tobacco tax money. We got to develop a continuous stream, a reliable stream of money for First Five and for child care and child development generally in the state of California. And it must be our commitment to increase our investment immediately. I have been saying for 35 years, many of you have heard me say this, budgets are statements of values. When you look at the budget of a family, or you look at the budget of a city or a school district or a state, you are looking at a statement of values. For the state of California to be first in per prisoner expenditure and 46th in per pupil is disgraceful. When I got into office, we were actually 47th back in '95. And I moved us up to 27th, but we have dropped down again. We used to be tied with New York. New York is spending twice what California is spending per student. That's just wrong. And when New York said they became the first state to offer tuition-free college, that isn't true. We were the first state. We got amnesia. So it's time for us to put child development, preschool, K-12, and higher ed together. If I gave you 20 pencils, one at a time, you could break all 20 pencils. But the strongest man or woman in this room can't break those 20 pencils if they're together. We need to stand together for education, from birth to graduate school. And I will just say that we also have to have a conversation about how we get a living wage to our future child care workers. The reason the young student came as an intern was that she had 4 kids she wanted to send to college. And as a preschool teacher, Camille could not send her 4 children to college. She needed to get a better paying job. All over the state, we have people leaving this profession because, frankly, unless they have a wealthy spouse or wealthy parents, they cannot afford to do this work. When you look at something that is the most important work in America, you must understand that we have got to be able to put more investment into this corner of our concern. It's not a corner, it's actually the centerpiece. Many of you have heard me speak before, and you know my favorite quote is Neil Postman. He said, "Children are living messages we send to a time we will never see." What is our message to the future? Is it a message of parsimony and pettiness? Is it a message of smallness and reduced ambition? Or is it a message where we dream for every kid, the dream that most of us in this room have experienced? I don't know about you, I'm the daughter of a machinist and a dress clerk. I've had a wonderful life because my parents made several propitious decisions. They decided to buy the little house that cost more in a better school district. I left a class, second grade class in San Francisco where I was one of 44 kids to go to Britton Acres in San Carlos where I was the 20th child. That was their maximum. So I did K-3 class size reduction for good reason. I will just say we're at a crossroads in America where people with a straight face are proposing tax cuts in lieu of preschools, increasing expenditures for the military, but cutting things like special ed and eliminating nutrition standards for school lunches. Bills to do both of those things have been introduced in our Congress. We've been cutting support for teachers in classroom, but complaining about how many police we need on the street, trying to shift resources from voter-approved tax initiatives like Prop 10 to fund a bloated, incompetent prison system, insisting that young mothers return to the workforce while cutting support for childcare. My fellow Californians, it is time to rise up. The poet, Nobel laureate James Heckman said, high-quality early childhood education can deliver a 13% per year return on investment for disadvantaged children. 13% a year. Anybody got a stockbroker that's doing that well by you? The fact is we need to make this investment. So let's demand that our government be generous and visionary when it comes to our children, and for starters, fund all needed child care spaces, pay a living wage to early childhood educators, create a path and a plan to educate and pay them at the same manner that we educate and pay K-12 counterparts, and provide safe and inspired facilities that say to young people and their families that we care, we want the best for them. So I say, rise up, California. When I entered the office of superintendent, we were pretty demoralized, but we were able to bring some wonderful visiting educators and others into that department to help it become nimble. That's what needs to happen now, but we all have to become nimble. And by the way, I will just say to you all that when I entered office, Pete Wilson had just been elected and he passed Prop 187. It said every teacher should be an immigration police officer and check the background status of their kids to make sure they were here illegally. I went to court against Pete Wilson because it was the wrong thing to do, and we won that lawsuit. So sometimes you have to stand when the littlest among us can't stand. And by the way, when he passed 227 that banned bilingual education, I gave what's called alternative school waivers to every dual language immersion school in the state. Over 50 of them stayed open because of me. Wilson threatened me again, but, well, you know, that's what happens if you show a little courage. And I will just say, we've made some progress. But this is the time. This is the moment where we have to do really something very big and important about preschool in the state of California. Do you know that the most immigrants coming to this country are not coming from Latin America? They're well-educated people coming from Asia. That just was on NPR last week. Some of you heard it. We've got to make sure that we, yes, are welcome to our immigrants, but we also need to grow our own, and that means educating more of our people. And I will just finish by saying this to you. Sometimes when we educate a severely disabled child, he grows up to be Stephen Hawking. Sometimes we help a poor child from a broken home, and later we find out he's our surgeon. Sometimes we help a shy little girl who is from a dysfunctional household, and you never know what she's going to be, but a lot of us know what's possible. I will just say the research is clear. What's missing is not the research. What's missing is the courage, the vision, and the heart. It matters that we change the conversation. It matters that we do this work for the youngest among us. It matters that we do it with a sense of urgency. This is important as any other thing we've ever done as the state of California. Please join with me and help me to do this with all of you together. We can do this. We can make this happen. Thank you all so very much. Aren't I supposed to take a few questions? Anybody got any questions? The first one's free. Okay, it looks like there aren't any. Well, let me just remind you one more thing then. Abraham Lincoln signed a bill called the Morrill Act. The year was 1862, and his predecessor, James Buchanan, had vetoed it. Buchanan didn't have a Civil War to fight. But Lincoln signed the Morrill Act. You know what it did? It dreamed that every state would have a land-grant college. Lincoln didn't live to see any of it. He died by an assassin's bullet. But here we are today. He dreamed that every state would have one. How did he do? Yeah, he won. Every state has at least one land-grant college. You know them by names like UC Berkeley, UC Davis, UC Riverside, all because Lincoln had vision, courage, and heart. I would argue that's what we have to give to our legislators, to our governor, to our superintendent. Hold their feet to the fire, to have the courage, the vision, and the heart that Lincoln had to help us have this great university and college system that is the United States. It's Duke, it's Cornell, it's Purdue, but it's a bunch of UCs as well. We benefited because of his vision. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for that in California again.
Delaine, may I ask you a question? I'm over here. I interviewed you a while back. I love you. You're awesome. When you were on your campaign for state superintendent. My name is Rico Tamayo. I'm president of the Early Childhood K-12 Council, TK-12 Council, for the California Federation of Teachers, the ones that really helped to bring you Prop 30 and then Prop 55. People tend to forget that. What advice would you give our next state superintendent of public instruction?
Well, it's several-fold. First, the department itself has been eviscerated. You know, we administered, when I got to the department, we administered 43% of the state budget. The staff was 3,000, but 1,700, or no, 3,300. The 1,700 were the schools for the deaf and the blind. Only 1,600 worked in that building in Sacramento. And since then, they've cut 300 more positions. So the next superintendent has got to be nimble about working with county offices to make sure that there's a better, more coordinated effort across the state to do the oversight financially as well as academically. Second, they have to bring some new blood. There's some great people at the department, don't get me wrong, but there are people that are retiring, and there are some wonderful people that are not getting all the camaraderie they need. So I went out and brought a bunch of people in from school districts who were current with some of the challenges they were being faced with at places like special ed. So the new superintendent should be nimble about making sure that when people retire, you bring in some people from the field who really know some of the challenges that are being faced. And the new superintendent needs to use the bully pulpit to challenge the governor and the legislature to do what's right. I found that I learned a lot by going around to the various counties. I went to all 58 counties visiting schools. You'll learn then not to envision what your home district looks like, and we're going to do that in all 58 counties. No, no. At Whale Gulch, where they have 10 kids and they're not even on the grid, they have a generator, you're going to do some things different than you do in LA. So, but we've got to make sure that we get, first and foremost, the next superintendent has to fight for more resources. Because there's this fiction in Sacramento, well, we have the local control funding formula. It's now up to the locals. Good luck there. Well, if you're underfunded to the extent that we're underfunded in the most expensive state in the union, to be in the bottom 10 is ridiculous. So there has to be, and I don't know if it's a lawsuit or what it is, but we've got to join together to get more resources, yes, to do the things we haven't been doing, like universal preschool, but to, in fact, and support the rest. We have the biggest class sizes in America. We have the fewest number of nurses, counselors, librarians. We are not doing right by these kids. And then we got to get more resources to build some new community colleges in rural, remote parts of the state. Because there are kids that are qualified to go to college, but it's 200 miles away. So they're not going. And we could get a lot more. We've only built, since 1985, we built one UC, we built 3 CSUs, one UC out of 10, 3 CSUs out of 23, 9 of the 115 community colleges. Do the math. 13 campuses is what we built. In that same period of time, we built 23 prisons. Isn't that disgusting to you?
Yes.
It's disgusting to me. So you got to force the governor to understand that budgets are statements of values, and we've got to generate energy from the public at large to not just say we got local control funding formula, good luck, but rather to say we need to put more resources in to help the children with disabilities who may grow up to be Stephen Hawking, the children with challenges who, you know, if your mom was 14 when you were born, you may not get as much scaffolding as you need. So we gotta do a lot of things. The superintendent has got to use the bully pulpit and it has to be done aggressively and urgently.
Thank you for speaking truth.
Isn't she amazing? Please, another round of applause for Delaine Eastin.